Jun-Ho is a character that always kind of felt like he was going to have a climactic ending and a wider purpose in Squid Game. Throughout Season 1, we saw him as an undercover detective that was looking to uncover the games and reveal the horrors of the games to the wider population and authorities, but was ultimately shot by his brother. The entirety of the second season, we saw him looking to find the island with the help of Captain Park, who was actually working for the frontman. And in the third season, we saw a continuation of that, with him ultimately finding the island along with his brother, but it all pretty much being for nothing. Honestly, if you genuinely took all of his scenes from Season 2 and Season 3 out of the final cut, the show would barely be impacted in any way whatsoever. So I thought I'd put it upon myself to rewrite the ending for the character, give him some purpose like it actually felt like he had in Season 1, and try and send him out in the most powerful way possible, without changing the wider story too much. Here is how Jun-Ho's story should have ended in Squid Game Season 3. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The planned alternative ending. Well, funnily enough, Jun-Ho's ending was never actually supposed to go down this way, and I think that's pretty clear to see in the final cut, as it did all just feel kinda pointless. The creator of the show has come out and said that originally Jun-Ho and the forces that he teamed up with were supposed to arrive at the island and ultimately help put a stop to the games for good. This ending was also going to have Gi-hun surviving the games, which would have changed the ending completely to what we got. It was said that as the direction of the wider story changed, the timing of Jun-Ho's arrival was delayed, but the creator wanted him to stand face to face with his brother still, which would make In-Ho think that 222 would be able to be entrusted with him. Now, I get the idea of wanting the brothers to come face to face with each other, but there was no dialogue spoken other than Jun-Ho shouting why, and him actually being there contributed nothing whatsoever. So let's have a go at changing this. Jun-Ho's ending rewritten. Now, the moment that I'd change it from would be Episode 3. Episode 3 was when Jun-Ho found the island and ended up on the cliff where he was previously shot by his brother in Season 1. A moment which carried such weight to it and got featured in the first season. It appeared as a flashback in Season 2 and also as a flashback in Season 3. His whole story arc was about building towards being reunited with his brother and actually confronting him face to face in a way where questions could be asked, and maybe Jun-Ho would finally get some of the answers that he'd been looking for. Jun-Ho had been part of that establishment as he was undercover as a soldier, so he knew the dark ins and outs of what was going on, and his brother being at the head of it all is something that you'd imagine would quite literally break him inside. Instead of going back to the boat, which is what Captain Park wanted because he was working with In-Ho, I'd have had Jun-Ho go deeper into the island and ultimately end up finding it himself. He'd have the means to be able to protect himself, and I think that would have always been his plan. His memory was slowly coming back to him, so I'd have had him find the island that way because he wasn't actually that far from it. Once he found it, he'd radio the leader of the group of men that he was working with and share the location, because by that point, he'd no longer trust Captain Park after all of the information that Woo-seok shared. With him sharing the location of the island, Park would look to carry out an attack, but this time it would fail as the men would be prepared as they would have been warned by Jun-Ho. However, this would still allow the Coast Guard ship to start heading towards the island, which would cause the island to get to a point where they needed to evacuate. The timeline would still work the same, and he'd arrive after the final game once Gi-hun had sacrificed himself for the child, which was 222, and she'd be laying on the platform still. In-Ho would be spotted while sneaking around the games trying to find his brother, and it would lead to a gunfight commencing between him and the soldiers, which would then lead them to start the 30-minute timer as the ship would have been spotted. By now, the VIPs would have left the room, and it would just be In-Ho in there. This is where the brothers would come face to face whilst being in the exact same room for the first time since Season 1. Jun-Ho would ask the question of why to his brother like he did in the actual finale, and this is where I think Jun-Ho would also go on to explain how his brother's dead wife and child would never have wanted him to have done this and how they'd be disgusted in the person that he'd become. I'd have him say this because that death is what drove In-Ho to be there in the first place and compete in the games and ultimately end up becoming the frontman. We never truly saw In-Ho address the death and the fact that he lost the person that he loved most in the world. That was the character's turning point in life and the moment that he seemed to lose all emotion. So by his brother bringing it back up, it would have allowed us to have seen a different side to the character and an extremely emotional conversation taking place. One where maybe he was fueled with anger and rage, wanting his brother to keep their names out of his mouth, or maybe even one of upset where he'd break down because he might genuinely believe the same. Becoming the frontman was almost like a coping mechanism for In-Ho. We never really saw the true transition of In-Ho's journey to being the frontman, but I feel his dead wife and child was probably the last thing that remained with him that could render him back to how he used to be. I'd also bring them back up because they were important characters in shaping In-Ho, and they were never really addressed post-season 2. Jun-Ho would then ask why he shot him, and it would then be here where we'd see In-Ho saying how he never planned on killing him and how he made sure that he got back safe, and he didn't want to bring him harm, he just wanted him out of the way. By now, Jun-Ho wouldn't recognize his brother, and In-Ho would be telling him that they needed to leave because the island was going to be destroyed, but Jun-Ho wouldn't let him. He'd be wanting his brother to face justice for what he'd done and the fact that he was leading the games. He'd want to stay because he knew that the team were on their way with the Coast Guards and they weren't too far off. In-Ho would be pleading and would even mention how there was a baby that was out there as an alternative way of trying to persuade him to get them off the island. In-Ho would continue this pleading until he'd ultimately go on to attack his brother, tying back to season 1 when he fired his weapon at him for the first time. But this time, it wouldn't make a difference, and instead, Jun-Ho would return fire and ultimately kill his brother, leading him to die on the floor of the very games that he once watched everybody else die for entertainment. By this point, there would still be time left on the bombs that were around the island, and Jun-Ho would have time to go and retrieve 222. As he'd walk over to her, he'd see Gi-hun lying there on the ground, dead. And it would be a moment that would hit hard, because at the end of the original ending, they believed that Gi-hun made it off the island and potentially took his stash of cash. So this would provide closure in that sense. With Jun-Ho retrieving the baby, we'd see the Coast Guard boat arrive, following all of the soldiers leaving. The both of them would get on, and as they moved away, the island would then start to be destroyed, allowing us to get the close-up shot of Gi-hun's eye with the flames engulfing the room, but also In-Ho's eyes as well, showing that they both ended up in the same situation, even though they were on opposing sides. When it came to the very end, we could well see that Jun-Ho felt it was his duty to care for 222, like how we saw In-Ho originally leaving her with him, and if that were to be the case still, I believe that Jun-Ho would receive a letter in the mail which would have the debit card with all of the prize money on. This would also show that even though that one specific island was destroyed, it's part of a wider organization and there were eyes everywhere, showing that he was still being watched and that the games were still taking place on other corners of the globe. For me, this would then render the need for Cate Blanchett out of the ending because we wouldn't see In-Ho driving down the road in Los Angeles. We'd simply know that there'd be more games that were taking place out there through the card with the symbols on that Jun-Ho would have received, and the fact that he received the prize money, showing that even though Jun-Ho thought that it was over, it truly wasn't. Now, I'm not saying that this is the perfect ending for the character, but in my opinion, having In-Ho being killed doesn't take away from the fact that the bad guys win, because the games would still be taking place. Soldiers would have survived, and the VIPs would have too. But Jun-Ho killing his brother and realizing that there was actually no stopping the games would give the character more purpose, rather than just aimlessly on the water trying to find this island, and then when he did, it mean absolutely nothing. So I feel I would have liked the character's story to have gone a little bit like this. So, there you have it, how Jun-Ho's story should have ended in Squid Game Season 3. If you want to see a full breakdown of Squid Game Season 3, then check the video below. I've also broken down every game and shared the 5 most powerful moments in the season. Do you think Jun-Ho deserved better? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.